Here we go.
Welcome to Design Approach. On this episode of Design Approach, I had a chance to talk to a fellow UX designer, Kelly Reese. Now, this was a real pleasure for me. I'd been looking forward to this. We get into the weeds pretty quick. We share the same kind of vernacular, so I'll make sure to post a bunch of notes in the show notes here so you guys can look up any of the things that we talked about later on. One of the things I want this podcast to do is be a source of reference for local creatives, and especially in the field that I just love so dearly, the field of UX. Just like many UX designers, Kelly came to the occupation in a really, really roundabout way, what I love about the industry. She started off with a business degree, ended up at tech support for Schoolwires, now known as Blackboard in State College. She then transitioned throughout that career into a user experience designer while at Blackboard. Took a year off to run all the marketing at our local Chick-fil-A franchise, so that's pretty interesting. A little teaser, I tried to get her to tell me the recipe for all the herbs and spices on that chicken, so listen on to see if I crack the caper. Talked about how her team had some success at her second stint at Blackboard, implementing a nice UX team strategy into an agile environment, something that's very hard to do and we can all relate. Some great gems of wisdom in there. And most recently, Kelly has started a new job in the Department of Ag at Penn State. She was handpicked by the UX Forward leadership there to spearhead this new UX initiative that is going to be wide-reaching. It's undoubtedly going to have an enormous impact throughout that highly influential and high-profile department. Very impressive stuff. And that's a big reason why I'm so grateful that Kelly took the time to sit down with me to share that breadth of knowledge with the listenership here. So without further ado, Kelly Reese. So today we have a special guest. Kelly Reese is with us on the podcast. Kelly,
hi.
Welcome.
Nice to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. So sometimes I read a bio. I didn't prepare a bio for you, so why don't you just tell us kind of what you do, and we'll get into some questions.
Sure. I just started in August at the College of Agricultural Sciences at Penn State as a user experience specialist. I think it's technically multimedia specialist, but everything at Penn State is the titles are a little crazy, but I do user experience on their web services team in the marketing department. So I came from Blackboard previously, which was formerly Schoolwires, acquired, kind of a whole story there.
Excellent. Well, I'm super excited because you are the first alike UX designer that, like myself, that I've interviewed. So I've interviewed a UX researcher, a bunch of design types, some coding types, but this is the first on the podcast of a fellow UX designer. So I'm sure we'll have similar stories, and I want to hear it all because UX, it's one of those crazy occupations where people come from all directions. So this will be fun. So let me just start off by asking you, because I'm super interested in this. Right now at my company, we're currently talking about these kind of things. But what is like your ideal UX process? And if it comes in the form of like a project or however you want to explain it, but how do you approach designing from a UX perspective?
Sure. Well, that's an interesting question right now because, like I said, I just started in this new position, and it's actually a new position for the college that I'm working for. They've never had an in-house user experience specialist, so I'm actually getting to develop their process, basically.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so it's a little intimidating because, developing everything from scratch, but it's also really cool, and it's allowing me to kind of do more than I had previously done, which is cool. So we definitely are using a user-centered design approach in the projects that we've been working on so far. Some of them were just kind of like little feature redesigns on websites, so that was mostly just some mock-ups and things like that we worked on mostly internally. But coming up, we're doing some bigger projects where I'm starting from the very beginning with user research and stakeholder interviews, usability testing on baseline things, moving into card sorting and IA development, design development, the whole huge project for a website, which is pretty exciting. So really, I'm kind of refining as I go what our process is and what tools we use and things like that.
That sounds so fun to be able to do that, start from scratch. Because, and how long have you been at the ag department?
Just since August, the end of August, so September, October, November, 3 months.
Well, it's cool that you have support there. Someone said,
It is.
obviously said, we need to think about user-centered
Right.
design, and let's bring in someone to actually implement that. So you haven't currently ran a project through this process yet?
No, we're kicking off a big project. So basically, I'll explain kind of how the department is structured. So I said that it's part of the communications and marketing department, and there's a web strategy team, and basically we're kind of like a mini agency for the college. So any organization that's under the College of Agricultural Sciences comes to us when they need guidance or help or tweaking of anything on their websites. So there is a ton of websites that are under the College of Ag. So there's the Creamery, which is actually super fun,
Yes, I'm sure
selling
that's awesome.
ice cream and things like that.
I just saw, didn't you guys roll out a new website with the ice cream scoops?
I think that was rolled out maybe a couple years ago, but yeah,
really?
it's newer. Yeah.
To me, everything lumps together. I'm like, that new thing that's 3 years old?
Yeah, so I mean, we're refining the checkout process for the holidays and things like that. So smaller projects like that. And the extension office, I'm not sure if you're familiar with what extension means. I can give you kind of the 50,000 foot view. So when I first started, I did like a day of research on just this kind of stuff to understand it. It's a learning curve, when I haven't done any agricultural things before. So Penn State is a land grant university, which means they get state and federal funding for sharing research with the public, basically, agricultural research. So the extension is the public-facing arm of the College of Agricultural Sciences. So they distribute information to farmers and anybody who's interested in that kind of stuff. So yeah, so the extension is also another huge site, and that actually they just did a huge redesign process that launched, I think, 2 days after I started.
So what's all on there? Like the research itself?
Yep, research.
And these are like academic papers, or they're
there's
more
academic
like
papers. There's there's staff all around the state that are extension staff. Like there's an office in every county.
That's cool.
So they do workshops. They produce pamphlets and other kinds of documents. I should know more about this. I'm learning. They do also, like, it's pretty impressive. You should check it out. It's extension.psu.edu.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's farmers. It's if like I actually called the extension office a few years ago because I had a mold problem on my windows. They do things like that. There's master gardeners and
awesome.
Yeah, it's just anything that's agricultural or livestock, that kind of thing.
How'd you know about the mold thing?
Well, it's funny because getting this job, my family actually comes from kind of not agricultural, but my stepmom and my aunt are both 4-H people.
Okay.
And so my stepmom actually worked for the extension office in her county.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
so
awesome.
it's funny now that I work for them. So I think she recommended that I call them.
Yeah, like, oh, you have mold?
Yeah, so it's like I never knew they existed, but
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, I was gonna say, how would you have known to call about mold to an agricultural office? It doesn't seem like a 1-to-1, but
yeah, I mean, but then again, that's why they have the state funding, is because they're providing education
all
to
kinds of stuff.
yeah, and I mean, it's even like stuff about food safety and things like that, selling, like making your own wine and beer and selling it, and what are the best processes for that,
Nice.
running your own farm, things like that.
That's great.
Yeah.
And do you mostly just deal with the web entities? Do you?
Yeah, they don't. I don't think they currently have many web properties that aren't websites.
Right.
They might be developing more of those in the future, but for right now, it's mostly websites.
So we're talking. You may have your hands in tons of different websites.
Right. Yeah.
With
and
all different purposes.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I come from a product background. I was on a product development team before, so
That's my background as well.
yeah, it's pretty interesting. And again, I was on a product-facing team before, and now I'm in a marketing department doing mostly web stuff. And
Gotcha.
in the same day, I could be working on the Creamery site, the extension site, and other things. So it's kind of like it's a lot broader of a position, which is pretty fun.
Gotcha. Well, this is really interesting to me because I've only ever done UX on desktop software. Actually,
Right.
I mean a couple web entities, but mostly desktop.
Yeah.
And totally different world. So I mean the Creamer book, that's just e-commerce, right? That's
Right,
just a
it
typical e-commerce site. So that has all kinds of challenges.
Yeah.
So-
It's pretty interesting how different they are, but also how similar a lot of these user experience principles are. And I was going to say this earlier, I forget what we were talking about, but I've noticed a shift in the last maybe few years of how many people are familiar with what user experience is.
Yeah.
So at Penn State, like the director of my department talks about usability and
Nice.
things like that, which is just so impressive to me that it's kind of seeping into
Are
other
there any
industries.
like hurdles explaining it, or is there any misconceptions that people have, or
Not as much at this position
great.
because I think they are a lot more familiar with it. Which
did you ever deal with that in the
nice.
past?
Oh yeah.
You have any horror stories? We can swap horror stories without alienating any past employers.
To be honest, most of my struggle is explaining what I do to anybody else. my
I can relate.
dad still thinks I do technical support.
Yeah.
So
That's funny.
yeah, I've explained it to him about 5 times, and
Yeah, the struggle that I've had with explaining UX or implementing UX is the idea that to really get across the idea that the best way to do it is to test early and often. There's this idea that we actually were talking about this before so I'm going to be a little redundant, but we talked about like this idea that you bring in a master designer who can come in and do the perfect design to use all the perfect principles, and then whatever that outcome is, you test it to validate whether that master designer did a good job or not. And then if there's any user error, that's deemed a bad job on the UX designer, and you fix it and pump it out. But I found the exact opposite to be true. In fact, it's like if you follow the methodology, it'd be better to have, let's say, one master designer salary equals 3 mid-level design. It's better to have 3 mid-level people doing different facets of UX
Right.
and doing it touch points throughout the system or throughout the process. And I just was at the NNG, like a conference, and we learned some of the stuff that was invaluable to it actually changed the whole framework of how my company approaches UX. And the thing we learned, I think, that was the most important was there's these slices of UX. There's like specialties within UX,
Right.
and you can't. Typically, what'll happen is you just cut one out, but you can't. When you always have to do research. You always have to do the empathy stuff. Just all the way through. You need a UX developer, a researcher, a designer, a visual designer. Now, one person can have multiple roles,
Right.
but you need all those things per project, and sometimes stuff will get cut out, like testing is commonly cut out of the equation. So when you scale, the trick, this is what they told us, and it seemed to be true so far in my experience, the trick is you do everything, you scale back every one of those slices by a little bit. So when you scale the slices, what you do is you do a little less of each slice as opposed to take out a slice.
Right.
And the other way, you as a project grows or a team grows, you could add a second interactive designer and stuff like that. So just for my purposes, when we are building this, we're trying to do kind of what you're doing is like build the process. And it's been invaluable to kind of understand that, but the hard part is selling that, because in the past we were working under the idea that one master designer executed the perfect design.
Right.
So any tactics that you have that you could share with me on describing this stuff, it sounds like you have tons of support from the higher ups. So
Yeah, it's great.
do you ever like refer them to any sources, or they just come with that knowledge? Or
Yeah, like I said, in this project that we're kicking off, I just did just a short presentation a couple days ago with some benchmarking and basic research that I had found from Nielsen Norman Group and things like that. So it definitely helps them to see the real research, and especially Penn State. Research is like a scary word for me to say that I'm doing at Penn State, because Penn State is all about research, and so they take that very seriously, and it matters to them. If something is proven somewhere, then they're gonna get on board with it. So I think that is gonna become a big part of my process in documenting and making sure the processes are relying on actual research and actual best practices instead of, like, even if it's something I've learned over my career, I have to kind of back it up with something else. So
That keeps you honest though too. We
Right.
do the same thing. In fact, at the end of our research documents that we make, and by the way, I can totally empathize with you about the research. Minitab makes statistical software. It's
Right.
like hardcore statistics. So, we better have our numbers right.
Yeah.
And we better not skimp on any kind of like sample size or, you got to stay true to the methodology or we get called out immediately, which is not, but like I said, it's nice because it keeps you honest. And it really, the rigorous study of these methods has just been great. They've been proven. I've bored them
Right.
out like literally myself, and it's been great. But I mean, not myself, like me and my team. Like,
Right.
but I've seen it like live, in the real world and in the wild actually work. And the little trick we do is we take those articles, and depending on what the research at the end of the research paper, we always have a methodology like page at the end, and we just pretty much copy and paste NNG articles in that. So now I want to kind of pivot, talk a little bit about how you got into UX.
Sure.
I think this is super interesting because I come from a traditional graphic design background. That's what my degree was in. And I worked in design firms for a very short time. I mostly have been a corporate designer my whole career. And even though at some points in my prior careers, my job title was graphic designer, it's almost kind of like what you said in the very beginning about your job title is really multimedia, blah, blah. Mine was the same. It was like multimedia. And then I was doing UX, but I didn't realize what it was.
Right.
I was making these interfaces. In fact, what I did at my old job was like touchscreen kiosks at trade shows, to see product walkthroughs and stuff.
Yeah.
And that's when it started. And then, pretty much just there's a whole offshoot of graphic design now that just turns into UX. And it's just interesting to hear. I met, when I went to the NNG conference, I met, like 100 people that every single person had a different story. It was crazy. So I'm really interested to hear in your story.
Right.
So, I saw on LinkedIn your bio, and I saw that you went to Grove City and you have a degree in business management.
I do.
So why'd you choose business management out of high school?
I think, for one thing, I think I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I think that's pretty common.
Yeah.
And for another, my mom has always been a businesswoman in some capacity and a big influence on my life. And my grandfather was an entrepreneur, and I think it's funny because I've always had the same end goal, but how I'm going to get there has changed a lot. So
What's the end goal?
My end goal has always been to own my own business. I
Nice.
had no idea what that was going to be or how that would happen. I never did before. So business management was a way for me to get those skills that I knew I would need personally eventually. And it was broad enough that I knew I could get, a job and find something to do. So that's kind of how I
Is that like a
started in
typical
business.
business management just in general? Is that a typical like business degree?
Yeah, business management, business administration is a very common
Is that like
degree.
synonymous?
Yeah.
Or are they different?
Yeah, they are.
I'm so naive about business stuff.
Oh, sorry.
I went to art school. It's like,
Yeah,
Full
well,
story.
if I could go back in time, I would probably go to art school. But anyway, there's marketing, there's international business. There are a lot of business degrees that you can get that are a little bit more specialized. But in my mind, business management was the broadest one, which was good to me then. Now I wish that I had been a little bit more specialized. But since I didn't really know what I wanted, I think it was just a way to get a broad education.
Do you carry any of those things that you learned with you to this day, or was it just more of a catalyst?
To be honest, I probably use more of them than I think I do.
Yeah.
In my mind, I don't use my degree at all. But I think a lot of the stuff that fascinated me when I was getting my degree was like organizational behavior and human resources and things like that. So that, I think, communication, that stuff has stuck with me a lot more than principles and financial stuff,
Right.
and, that
Yeah.
kind of thing, more of the technical side. So I think just general business strategies.
I can see a one-to-one with UX, right?
Yeah.
The organizational stuff.
For sure, yeah.
I mean, that's a whole
Yep.
that's a whole new offshoot of UX is like system design. That's
Right.
what it's called. And essentially, it's someone using just the human-centered design
Right.
process on a business org.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's
Now
what
that
they
you
do.
say that, it makes sense because
Right?
what I was always most interested in business was the people, you know. So
Yeah.
I think it makes sense that I ended up in UX.
Nice. Man, you must. It seems like this new job is a good fit because you get to
It is.
build this. You're doing that. You're in essence doing just but from a UX perspective, but you're building this whole process.
Right. I think my second week at the job, they were like, okay, well, you're going to present on what your process is. And I was like, I don't know. What is my process?
Just finding where the bathrooms are. Like, where do I take breaks?
I know. Still, pretty much every day, somebody tells me somebody said something, and I'm like, who is that again?
Right. Yeah.
Who is
That's
that
great.
person? So anyway, I did put together a presentation on what our entire process would be, and
Nice.
I am going to try to follow it.
Right. That's
I'm
awesome.
sure it will change a little bit, but I mean, it's the ideal. It's what I want to stick to.
Nice.
So.
That's the trick, right? You put out the blue sky, and then
Right.
of course, and nothing goes perfectly, but the
Yeah,
closer
it
you get to that.
was to give them an idea of what it might be. I mean, it's discovery, design,
Yeah.
development, that kind of process.
So you get the business degree. We'll go just chronologically through,
Sure.
if you don't mind. And then, so then walk me through your first stint at Blackboard. So you were at Blackboard for a while, you left, and then you came back. So
Right.
what
So
was
it
your first
actually
stint?
it wasn't Blackboard back then. It was Schoolwires.
Yeah.
Blackboard acquired Schoolwires maybe about 4 years ago now.
Is that like e-learning stuff? What is it?
Blackboard, yes, they're e-learning. They acquired Schoolwires. Schoolwires was a K through 12 content management system and some other things. So they acquired Schoolwires for their product in the K through 12 market. Blackboard is more focused on higher ed.
Okay.
Yes.
And do they make the content, or is it just CMS stuff?
Most of their stuff is LMS, learning management
Yeah.
systems, and they have some. There's one tool called Collaborate, which is like a meeting tool, which is actually amazing. They had other things. It's a really big company, and I honestly couldn't tell you every single thing they were involved in. But yeah, so it was mostly what I did. The company I worked for was a content management system and web communication platform for the community, basically, for K through 12
Right.
school districts.
Cool. And
So-
you were, what'd you do there originally?
So I actually interned there when I was in college. They actually started in the business incubator across the street. We're at the Penn Theater right now, and so there was on the second floor of the building
I didn't
across
know
the
that.
street is a.
That's
I
cool.
don't know if it's still a business incubator, but when I was in college, there was about 30 employees, and so I did an internship there.
So what'd you do? What were you doing as an intern? What was your day-to-day?
I honestly can't remember very much. It was just for a summer, and I was mostly helping out. I ended up being in technical support, so I think I did some of that, and I did, I think probably I mostly did content migration stuff for people who had signed up and needed help moving from their old platform to the new platform. It wasn't something that they officially did, but they kind of helped out here and
Yeah.
there when they could,
Yep.
because it was such a small company back then. So then when I graduated, they hired me, and I was in technical support for 3 years, which wasn't my end goal, but it was a great way to get in the company, and I was in the client services department, so I learned a lot about that. And then that was, let's see. So it's amazing how much of your own life you forget when you don't think about it very much.
Well, I have two former coworkers that came from tech support into UX.
Yeah.
In different, and it's not that uncommon, I don't think.
It seems like whenever I talk to other people who are in user experience, there's like a few paths that are really common. Graphic design, like you. Another one of my colleagues was psychology and teaching,
Yep.
and technical support. I mean, I think there's positions that kind of. I mean, being in technical support, I think my user empathy is about 150%,
Right,
because
yeah.
I've been on the phone with customers who can't figure things out, and I understand how frustrating it is. So I think any position that makes you a better designer or more empathetic to users is going to kind of point you towards user experience eventually.
It's like a famous Bill Gates quote. It's like, you learn most from your most angry users, or something like that.
Well,
Which
that's
is so true.
Yeah, just a segue here. One thing I love about usability testing, I usually use software that records their face.
Yeah.
And I love that so much, because people will be like, oh, this is so easy to use, and their face, they're just so angry and frustrated, and it's so funny because people will assume they act like they're fine, and they're obviously
The self-reporting
upset.
phenomenon is fascinating to me. The fact how unreliable is self-reporting, it's great. I think that's like, to this day, I think it's my major superpower as a designer, is the fact that I just do the designy thing. When someone says a thing, I just ask a couple questions and get to the real,
Right.
what's the real issue here. The example I always use, is my favorite, is the when you survey people on what kind of coffee they like, they all say dark, robust coffee. And then in blind taste tests, they always go for Dunkin' Donuts, which is like the weakest coffee, because people fancy themselves as someone who
Right.
wants a dark, robust coffee, because they think that's cool. That's the thing to say. It's
Right.
just a self-reporting phenomenon, and it's just, I see it every day.
Yeah.
Just like you said, you could have someone say out loud, or I'll do a usability test, and they'll have critical errors where they cannot execute the task, and then in the post-test interview they'll say, "Man, that was great. It was so
Right.
easy to use. I love it." Blah blah blah. There's so many variables and factors that go into someone's experience. It's but you can almost guarantee that if that was a real project that maybe their salary relied on, and they couldn't execute the task, they wouldn't say it was fun and good.
Right.
So-
And I think human beings want to do a good job. Even, no matter how many times you say, we're testing the software, not you.
Yeah, I know.
They still want to get it right,
Yeah.
because they want to feel like they're good at it.
Yeah, we do that spiel too in the beginning. Before we even start, it's like, this is not about,
Yeah.
this is to see how well the prototype maps to your behavior,
Right.
not how well you can execute on
Right.
the prototype. So
Yeah.
it is,
And that's actually a good transition into how I got into user experience from technical support. So again, Schoolwares was a smaller company. By the time I started there officially, it was bigger. I don't remember how many employees they had at that point, but they did the thing that I think a lot of small companies do when they're busy or getting too much work for the staff they have. They start loaning people out to other departments and having you do two jobs kind of at the same time.
Yeah.
So even though I was in technical support, they loaned me out to the development department for the summer. I was mostly working with somebody who was a technical writer, but at that point, they were starting to want to get into user experience. So the manager, I can't remember what his title was back then, but he was, I think he was over the development department, and he said, will you do usability testing? And I had no idea what that was. So he handed me, what was it? Rocket Surgery Made Easy by
Yeah.
Steve Krug.
Yeah.
And I read it, and I did it. I did a round of usability testing, presented it to the CEO, and it was like, bam, now. And
New
so,
job title.
Yeah, so
Nice.
he emailed me a couple weeks later, and he was like, hey, you seem to be good at this, and it seems to be something you enjoy doing. Would you mind if I just
And
send
did you enjoy that?
Yeah, I did. And I think he had checked it with my boss first, but he was like, do you mind if I just send you articles here and there to
Nice.
read up on this stuff? And so eventually he poached me from client services and into a role with user experience.
I was thinking about what you said when you record the face. And we do the same. I mean, it's invaluable. And the way the UX department started at Minitab was there was like a couple of people doing usability. It's kind of like, this was years and years and years ago. But the way it became a real department, and when they started to really like take user experience seriously, was when we did a quick usability test of our checkout on our old website. Like I said, it was like over a decade ago. And a user got so frustrated. One of the people that was tasked with doing some design stuff, user experience design stuff, just knew inherently that the checkout process was bad,
Right.
due to just some real broken design principles. So it was almost like a validation test, but it needed to have been, because there was no backing, there was no support at the time. And what had happened was the person got so mad that they couldn't it was one of these endless loops where the form cleared. Like if you made a mistake and you hit submit and you didn't fill out a required field that wasn't marked required, that kind of deal. Just some of the most basics. And the user got so upset, he was like punching the table and like numerous times said, I would have already quit by now. Like, I'm only doing this because you're asking me to. Like, this is absurd. And showing that video to stakeholders is what they said, oh my gosh, this is important. Like, we somehow, a team of smart people deployed this thing thinking it was great, and it's so bad that this guy's punching the table. So, you talk about qualitative versus quantitative, and sometimes all you need to see is someone like punching a desk and like getting angry, like shaking the monitor.
When you talk about getting buy-in from stakeholders and executives, that's the key there, is to actually show them a user test that pretty much always works.
So even at Manytab, where it's so data centric, like they want to see that the research that we publish is very, very in depth. But at the end of the day, you can't ignore a user so angry. I mean, we thought he was going to like punch the computer. It's bad. And to this day, we use it, even though it's this old video. We use it as like, this is why this matters. Like look at what unintended like harm you could do to someone. You could like have them really, really angry.
You have people sign the recording consent forms. You'll have to start having them sign a property damage waiver.
Like put padding around the monitors. Just punch here, just have like a big pad. Well, that's fascinating. It's so funny how I have we have an e-learning tool as well to teach statistics. So I have a little bit of interest in that as well. It's just fascinating how it's like, it's all kind of the same stuff, kind of like what you said. All right, so where are we in your chronology here? You transitioned from tech support, and then it says here that you had a stint with Chick-fil-A as a marketing director.
So basically, I know, it seems out of left field.
So was it tech support, Chick-fil-A?
No, it was tech support, and then I went into the development department with UX. I did that, I think, for about 2 years. I was basically a user experience designer there, and it was still my first job. Basically, it was the first company I had ever worked for, and I think, it was that youthful, everything at this company is terrible, and even though in hindsight it was really great.
So you voluntarily left?
I think that I wasn't quite sure user experience was what I really wanted to do. I had kind of fallen into it accidentally. And so because of that, I don't know that I really saw that I had chosen it, So it just kind of felt, I think I just got bogged down by other things. And so I'd always thought that I would enjoy marketing, and my husband and I were really interested in restaurants. He's a great cook, and so
awesome.
we had kind of thought about maybe doing restaurants in the future. So I was like, well, why don't I met the owner of Chick-fil-A in State College, and so I was like, well, why don't I try this out? And so I was the marketing director there for a year, and it turns out
just the franchise in State College?
Yep.
So each franchise has its own marketing director?
Most of them, yeah. I went to corporate for training, which was really amazing.
That's cool. Where's the headquarters?
In Atlanta.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a company I really admired. They have like this service philosophy called second mile service, where they, go the second mile, and their service part, again, it goes back to the user empathy and wanting to treat people well. So anyway,
what's so cool about it? Like, what's so interesting about that particular philosophy?
Well, I mean, when you think about Chick-fil-A, most people think of it as a fast food restaurant, which is basically what it is. But like, I was the marketing director, which was a higher position at a franchise, and I would go up and take somebody's tray for them after they ate. You don't expect somebody to do that at a fast food restaurant. So I mean, we did like children's events every week, things like that, like community events and stuff like that. So it's just more of a service-oriented business model.
Was that part of your job too, to like organize that, or was it to promote that, or all of the above?
Yep, all of the above. And so anyway, it turns out I didn't really love marketing, and especially, I'm not saying anything bad about the position. It's a great position, but it's a very broad position. Since you're the marketing director for one store, your marketing, your promotions, your advertising, your merchandising,
PR,
your a little bit of sales,
pick up the trays,
and you're picking up people's trays and organizing children's events. It was just a lot more than I really wanted to be doing, and I felt really scattered. I felt like I couldn't really focus on things I was really good at. So that bothered me, and
is it like a burnout factor, or was it more of just
a little bit?
You couldn't focus on one particular area.
Yeah, I think it wasn't very focused, and also I am a food lover, and when you work at a restaurant, you can't eat lunch at noon, which bothered me to no end. I would starve, I'd eat at 10 o'clock in the morning because I didn't want to wait till 1.
I mean, that stuff matters. It's just funny. I was expecting you to say maybe something else.
No,
but that's
I
great.
mean, that's like the very practical reason why that didn't work out.
That matters a ton.
But I mean, really, because my husband and I were thinking maybe we should own a restaurant one day, and then I realized when you own a restaurant, you can't eat at times, and that's what I love about restaurants is the eating. So,
total side note, that's another thing I love about living here is all the cool. I think the restaurants here are really good.
Yeah,
like
especially in the last few years.
I know, it's so great, right? Mm-hmm. Like when we lived in the city, there's equal amount of great restaurants, probably more, but they're scattered with a whole bunch of other stuff.
Right.
And around here, smaller community, word of mouth, and you just know where the good spots are, and there's just like. It's just this accountability you have to have as the restaurants, keep the standards high. I just love eating out. I guess is my whole story. Me and my whole family, we eat out all the time.
Uh-huh.
Which, by the way, if you and your family want to eat out, you should consider the Legends Bar and Grill. This is my plug. I don't have to do it. But no, that's where we're holding the podcast tonight, and the food is. If you ever
really
eaten here, it is good. It's really good. Most of Penn State stuff is really good.
Yeah, School Wires and Blackboard is right down the street.
Oh, so you
it's in
typically
Innovation Park.
Okay,
so
cool.
we would come here sometimes.
Nice. No, the food is great. I forget. I always get like one particular sandwich. It's like their French dip or something. It's like delicious. Anyway, sorry, totally derailed you there. So, was there any other things about the Chick-fil-A experience?
No, I think it was a great experience, and like I said, going to corporate for training, and it was a company. Going back to my love of organizational behavior,
right.
I always admired Zappos and Chick-fil-A, just as corporate cultures of putting people first, putting customers first.
Did you study them in college?
No, they weren't around when I was in college. But
is Chick-fil-A that new?
Oh yeah, I guess Chick-fil-A was probably around, but it wasn't on my radar. I think it's it started in Atlanta, so it's kind of moved north slowly.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, it was a great experience, and I think any experience that teaches you what you don't want to do is just as valuable as teaching you what you do want to do. So
I totally agree.
Yeah. But long story short, it made me realize that that's not what I wanted to do, and I ended up going back to School Wires.
Right. Yeah. So. And like you said, nothing to disparage marketing. It just wasn't a good fit for you. So what's the secret ingredients in the Chick-fil-A?
I'm not
gotcha,
sure.
Journalism.
I still love it. So the spicy chicken sandwich.
Sweet tea is like addictive. I'm sure it's just tons of sugar. That's
probably
the ingredient there.
I think.
Sugar. Okay, so then you go back to Blackboard.
Right.
And there what kind of role did you step into when you came back?
I came back as a user experience designer again.
Did they ever really switch your title there, or were you still like tech support, one foot in tech support?
Oh no! Whenever I moved over to the development department, my title was actually user experience editor. I was doing kind of half user experience design and half editing of their in-screen user help kind of things.
That's the one position I forgot to say during the slices.
Yeah.
UX copy.
Right. Yep.
In every copy.
Yeah. Ensuring consistent tone of voice and things like that. So it was a little bit half and half, but then when I came back, I was a user experience designer and didn't really do the copy as much.
Was there anything we missed about the Blackboard experience or user experience in that part of your career?
So when I went back to Blackboard,
what was your process there?
Yeah, so I was a user experience designer, and at that time, like I said, it was just a few years earlier that we really started getting into user experience as a discipline. So we've changed our process kind of a lot, and I think that was kind of a, good or bad, just what happened with them, where they were trying to jump into the world of agile development and all that stuff, you know. I mean, it's sometimes
that's a huge area of study now. When I was at the
Right.
NNG conference, they talked mostly about how to fit it into agile.
Right. Yeah. So,
So
I mean,
they were
it's
struggling with that.
it's extremely challenging.
Oh, it's tough.
Trying to make a transition, especially when you don't have necessarily all the buy-in you need and everything. So we kind of went through a few iterations of how they structure their teams, but my favorite, and I think the one that worked the best, was we did squads for a while. So let's see, how long was I? I think I was back for maybe 4-ish years. So I mean, I was there for a while again, and so we did squads where just in our user experience team, I think we did it in a really unique way that I loved, and I think it works great, and I don't know why.
All right,
So
I'm
many
excited.
people don't do that as much.
Yeah.
So basically, we were in a squad which was UX designer, software architect, developer, QA, you know, that whole
Cross-functional team, yeah.
Yep, cross-functional team, and we were working on designs and projects. But just on our user experience team, we had a user experience designer and a software architect that were a team. We named ourselves. My coworker Heather and I were Team Batman. So
Nice.
it was awesome.
Was that adopted across the board internally, or did you just call yourselves that?
No, I mean, our team was about 6 to 8 people,
Yeah,
so
I'm just
it was small, yeah. But anyway, so when we were designing things from the very beginning, an architect was working with the designer, and so whenever I had a technical question, I didn't have to wait for a process. I didn't have to pass anything off. I could just ask them, you know, turn around and ask them right next to me.
Nice.
And so we talked about all of that stuff, which I think just made us a lot more efficient in our designs, because we were talking about technical feasibility, and you know, if the design was important, I would push back, and so we got a lot of that stuff taken care of more up front than I think a lot of development departments end up doing. And so even though we weren't completely agile at first, I just really liked that part of that process, and I think it worked really well.
This is kind of interesting. They talked about, I was just at this NNG thing, so I can't get it out of my head.
Right.
But I found it so valuable. I'd been a UX designer for 8 years, and then I kind of got this training from 2 pretty hardcore UX people, like hard knock style, but it was very centric to my company. So it was kind of nice to go there and validate the stuff that we had did over the last 8 years, as well as,
Right.
you know, fill in the gaps that we were missing and stuff like that. So it was really interesting. And one of the things that we had, they talked about T-shaped specialists,
Okay.
which, remember the slice I was talking about? They said, so you should have, to build a quality team, you need, a UX team, you need someone who's, ideally, who the T means that, I'm drawing in midair here, but it's like the short line of the top of the T is your specialty. So you need to have one specialist for each of the UX entities that you need. Development, research, copy, interaction, visual design. And I think I'm missing one, but whatever. You get the idea. And then the long part of the T is that everyone should be able to do a couple other things as well as almost like secondary, or to have a little more broad experience.
Right.
So at any given time, a team could execute all those things that need to be done on a project. And if you get to a point, it could just be one person that does all those things, and they have one specialty, but they also make sure they do all the other facets. And at any time during the process, if it shrinks down to a part where you just can't, even implement some kind of like minimal viable UX strategy, it's best to not do just one or the other. Like, don't just step in as an interactive designer and then leave. You just say, well, this project doesn't get UX. This project, unless you're going to do it right, don't do it. Okay. That's kind of, I'm saying it more aggressively. They said it in a nicer way, but that's kind of what and it started to make sense to me more like, oh, I get it. You can't just, and in fact, this is kind of what we fell into with, before we adopted the human-centered approach, was we just prototyped a lot. And we were, essentially doing, like, creating churn. We weren't creating churn, but it was like high fidelity prototype, takes a long time to make,
Right.
Test it, unearth huge errors, then and then you're sharpening the blade, but you're sharpening the blade on the high fidelity prototype, which takes a long time.
Right.
So the adage of $1 up front, just like what you said, the upfront work really saves you $100 by the time you get to that
Right.
high fidelity prototype stage.
Right.
So and we found it to be true. Like, we can do the same amount of work as we used to do, except now 20% of our time is just on the research part in the beginning, and like paper prototyping instead of high fidelity prototyping and stuff like that. Because then you get the big errors out of the way. Any critical, if you're at a high fidelity prototype stage and you have critical errors, you didn't do enough testing up front. I mean, that's a good indication that you didn't get the gotchas out of the way, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So that's what we found, and it's been pretty eye-opening. And the agile thing is really interesting, and that's like a big area of study right now because it doesn't seem to jive.
Speaking of Adobe, have you tried XD?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to talk about it?
Speaking of prototyping, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I just started trying to use it a little more. I hadn't done a lot of the prototyping myself before because I was on a whole design team, and now I'm like a
What
UX.
did you use before?
Well, I think they had done. We were doing things. We weren't always doing things really right at my last company. So a lot of the prototyping we did was self-developed, not using a tool.
Like HTML or like...
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure.
We do stuff like that. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So anyway, they weren't using a specific product. So now that I'm a UX team of one, I'm trying to learn how to do more of it. So I'm looking at XD and things like that, and it's...
I highly recommend UX Penn. Have you heard of that one?
I've heard of them. I haven't. They have a prototyping tool?
Yeah, UX Penn is, that's what
they
it is.
They do a few things, don't they?
Yeah, the reason why I like it, and maybe it won't fit your needs, but the reason why I like it so much is, actually I think it will, is we just went through this process as well. We had a team, we hadn't formalized any one tool, and we had like 4 different prototyping tools. One guy was using Balsamic, another, one lady was using, I always forget the name of this one. And of course, we had someone on Envision, and then this other one that's like even lesser known. And we looked at our needs, and we did this fully fleshed out thing. And UX Pin was really nice because it had what they call these design systems in it. It's a little more expensive than like Envision. Envision is essentially, in my opinion, a graphic designer friendly UX tool. Like it's really good if you can make high fidelity prototypes if you're good with Photoshop pretty much. You pretty much, it talks really well with Adobe products. So you bring in these JPEGs and you add interactivity. But UX Pin is more of a developer kind of tool. Okay. It's not. Sorry, I take that back. It's not a developer tool at all. It's a nice WYSIWYG, but you can have these design systems that you share assets. So you pretty much build a repository. Okay. So one of the current things that we're in charge of is to make sure all of our products, it's hard to do, they stay consistent as possible across the board. So by making these design systems, all the prototypes, for instance, so one of the things I'm in charge of is, so I said the T shape. So my T, my short line of the T, I'm the the head visual designer. So if we make a stylistic change, or we just went through a rebrand, I can take the marketing document and then translate it very easily into our design system library in UX Pin, and just hit a button, and everyone's prototypes are automatically like updated with the new whatevers.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and there's like very little cleanup you have to do.
Yeah, I think design systems are awesome and fascinating and great. And
here's my favorite part too: is there's a feature. There's like 3 modes. There's like design mode, like share mode, which is comment mode, and then there's a mode that's just like for developers, where it's almost like when you hit in the inspector in Google, and you ever do that, inspect element, like, and you see, so you can literally hand over a UX Pin thing, and it gives a lot of the developer stuff that they need.
Right.
We had very rigorous documentation practices before that, and it was like dictating pixel padding and stuff like that for all the UX elements. And now it's done for me in UX Pin. So
we at Blackboard, we use Sketch in conjunction with Zeppelin. But I think Adobe XD, actually, I think just last week I saw an email that they have that coming out where they will show the...
Yeah. The only reason we didn't pick UX or XD was Adobe XD, because we all have Adobe Creative Cloud subscription. So why would we spend more money on this other product? It's just not there yet for us. It wasn't,
For sure. I've, in the last few years, been heavily learning Illustrator and things. So it frustrates me to no end that I can't do all the things that I can in Illustrator in XD.
Yeah, it'll get there. I'm convinced if you read the blogs and stuff. I mean, it's just, they're super smart. They're doing
Right.
it in stages, and right now it's just not. It doesn't have what we need. But I could easily see it. It's really good for e-commerce. Like phone, if you want to like responsive design mock-ups and stuff.
Yeah, I think it's just for me, it's going to probably be a pretty easy way to do some quick prototyping.
Yeah.
And especially because, like you, I have the Creative Cloud subscription, so it just goes along with that.
Yeah, we had things like it's tough because you can't really have like an interactive button element yet. Like buttons don't have a hover state and stuff, so it is a little like not true to life as far as when it comes to the high fidelity stuff.
For sure.
But we do have a UX developer that does these high fidelity prototypes. That's like right at the end of the stage. It's like the developers literally look at that code and sometimes just use that. The front end guys sometimes just use that stuff, in the final product, like the CSS and stuff. But check out UX Penn. And there's man, I'm so bad with names. I wish I was better. There's also the other one that we saw was even more expensive, but it's a desktop. It's kind of like it's like a Cadillac kind of version, and that one was good too. But its design systems weren't as good as UX Penn. So but it had more functionality overall. I forget what the name of that one is. Anyway, we'll put links to a bunch of this stuff in the show notes that we talked about. So, as well as any of the stuff you want from your department or anything like that, I'll put them in the show notes so people can reference it. You can put the secret Chick-fil-A recipe on there. There's no liability. That's never going to happen. I'm never going to know. I'm sure it's just MSG. Is that the secret ingredient?
I don't think
Just
so.
lots of
I mean,
MSG? I'm kidding.
it's good chicken.
Cool. That was a total tangent. But yeah, check out UX Penn. It's great.
Okay.
I really like it. I wish I could remember the desktop one. It's like it's like the most used.
What does it do?
Just a UX prototyping tool. A lot more. Just like UX Penn, it does a lot more than just prototyping. So I kind of have a couple questions here about some personal work. Sure. I ran across your website from your LinkedIn, which, by the way, I was impressed. It was pretty awesome to show some of your process there.
Thanks.
And it was it made me really kind of excited to talk to a fellow UX designer about this kind of stuff. So do you have any passion projects or hobbies that you're working on currently?
Yeah, so I don't know if this is super accurate, but I always call myself a serial crafter.
Nice.
I kind of go through phases where I get really into different artistic endeavors. It's mostly like kind of folk art kind of stuff. Like for a while I was doing woodblock prints.
Oh, cool.
Which is just, I love that. The feeling of carving wood is just really awesome. Anything that is like really tangible with my hands.
How big?
I was mostly doing like 5x7-ish, 8x10.
It's legit.
Smallish. Yeah.
No, that's pretty big, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
I did some of that stuff in college, and we did like
smaller ones.
Yeah, like I don't even know, like A4 size stuff, like little teeny.
So yeah, I went through a woodblock carving phase. Painting before that with mostly acrylics.
Acrylics?
I got into woodblock carving because I started painting on plywood. I think I don't remember why. Maybe at Lowe's out front, or maybe it was Home Depot. They have scrap wood that's like $1.
Yeah, nice.
And I was like, wow, that's awesome. And if you paint on plywood, it kind of takes on the grain of the wood. It's really cool. So woodblock prints, and then I got into embroidery for a long time. And more recently, I'm doing watercolors and things like that. But I've also been extremely interested in graphic and visual design. When I was working at Blackboard, we had a Treehouse subscription, so I was, going through all their web design, UX design, but it also got into a little bit of graphic design, which is how I started learning Illustrator and Sketch and things like that. So I've just kind of fallen in love with that part of it. I'm trying to do kind of some on the side illustration work.
Nice.
So
like what kind of
stuff?
stuff?
Getting into that. I opened a Society 6 store. Do you know what that is?
I have no idea.
It's one of those print-on-demand companies, so you upload
That's cool.
artwork, and they print it on products, mugs, backpacks,
Yeah, like Zazzle. But
yeah, there are a lot of them out there. Mostly print products, all of your typical. It's funny because when I started getting into more tech work, web work, and user experience, I went through a phase where I thought I shouldn't use paper at all. Everything should be in the cloud. I should take notes, and then I've kind of come full circle where I just really enjoy paper. Yeah. And I think paper is back, kind of,
I can totally relate.
Yeah.
In fact, and I don't know if this is like my age or what, but I occasionally have the opportunity to mentor younger designers, and I always recommend, and there's like research to back this up, to start on paper.
For sure, yeah.
Pencil and paper, it literally connects in your brain in a different way. Literally writing things in sentences. If you want to remember something, and this isn't, like some people left brain, right brain, whatever. This is across the board. The research is definitive. If you literally write it down, you have a better chance of remembering it. Same thing with drawing. Whenever we do cross-functional team, like ideation, like workshops to figure out new product designs or new features, we require them to literally draw out in these like charrette type user scenarios. And what it does is it just maps to the brain more. Even if you're more of a linguistic thinker, forcing them to draw it, it just there's research that's pretty straightforward about how that makes your ideas more fleshed out, and it gets you further down the line of like empathy, essentially. Like, oh, this idea is not abstract anymore. I'm forced to actually draw the person, I don't know, picking up their Netflix video or from the box, back when that was a thing. Yeah. So
and I think one thing my colleagues from Blackboard and I talked about a lot is having creative pursuits personally makes you feel so much more creative in your work. Like even if, doing a creative job for a living, you'd think that, that's your creative outlet, but doing it on your own time, it just made it so much better for me. We were all big doodlers during meetings, and one of my colleagues actually crocheted during meetings, which on the surface looks like she's not paying attention at all. Right. But when you ask her a question, she was, right there. So it's just like, that mind-hand connection, and anything creative that I do, it's like your brain is working on it when you're not thinking about it. Right. So it just, I don't know, I think it helps to develop any kind of thinking and stuff like that. So, but anyway, with illustration, mostly print products, like maybe cards and things. I haven't really gotten into it as much as I'd like to, but I started. I have a similar thing. Similar pursuits outside of work, just like totally artistic. Some of them have no future of any kind of monetary gain. Yeah. I mean, because I'm refueling myself for my job, that gives me that opportunity. So I can totally relate to that. We'll put a link to your store. What is it again? Society 6. Yeah, we'll check it out. Okay. For real. Yeah, there's not much in it yet. I'm working on it. I actually, kind of going back to my work history, I actually got laid off from Blackboard at the beginning of this year, and it took me much longer than I expected to get a job. So after I went through the initial wallowing and terrible things about losing my job, I started making myself work on that kind of full time. So it was kind of an invaluable period of my life where I really got to focus on things that I've been wanting to do for a long time. Cool. So it was just really good for me creatively and personally, I think, to kind of explore those more. So during that time, did you have you been able to maintain that kind of momentum toward your personal goals? Yeah, even though now you have a full-time job? I haven't as much as I want to, but I'm still pushing myself to do that. And I know that I talked a lot about Illustrator, but then I also, like I said, I'm a serial crafter. So like no matter how much I love one thing, I'm always going to end up with a different passion 2 months from now. So I got really into graphic digital work, and then I fell in love with watercolors all of a sudden. I don't even remember why. And so I got myself this watercolor journal and watercolor paint or watercolor pens. It's like there's water in the handle. I've seen that. So I can sit on my couch at night and paint. So I'm trying to make myself get back into it a little bit more. And speaking of my website, for one thing, I want to put illustration work on there eventually. So I mean, that's a goal of mine, is to keep moving towards that. But at the same time, I actually didn't have a portfolio website before I got laid off. And when I got laid off, that was the first thing I did, because I realized that was going to be really important for me. And honestly, I think getting laid off ended up being one of the best things for me. I mean, I think you've probably heard of imposter syndrome. I think every UXer struggles with that because, for one thing, I think it's still a new discipline, and I think most people didn't come from it, and didn't get a degree in it, so everybody kind of feels like they are a little bit of a fraud to begin with, because it's like you fell into it kind of thing. So stepping back from all the work I did on a day-to-day basis and thinking through my processes and writing it all down just was like really empowering for me to realize, hey, I actually know what I'm doing. And you know, I'm good at this. And I don't know, I think it was, getting laid off was something that really helped me to focus my career a little bit more, I think.
I can totally relate to that. The people I worked with, I had one guy in particular who was like my mentor, who was like a PhD in human computer interface design, and he literally designed like Ameritrade or something, you know, this guy was a guru. Right. And I told you he gave us like on the job training, like hard knocks school in UX. And for 8 years I did that. And then I went to this just recently, this NNG conference, and I realized, you know, we're working in this hardcore desktop software, and we're, you know, simplifying extremely complicated ideas. Not to diminish the work of anyone that does an e-commerce website or anything like that, but I just realized the breadth, just like you said, the breadth of the kinds of challenges that I've had to work through is vast. I'm like, oh man, like this is legit, you know, and you do have that imposter syndrome. It's just, I think everyone deals with that in every occupation. I think so too. I think especially in an occupation where you can become, you know, pretty accomplished in the field without having a background in that said field, you know. Most people, if you're an accountant, you have an accounting degree. Right, and I think the titles change so much, and they're kind of ambiguous. I mean, I remember when I first was a UX designer, I think it took me 6 months to realize what the difference was between the different titles and things like that, and it was just, you know, I think so much importance, I'm wiggling my fingers like sarcastically, so much importance mystical is placed on the titles. I know, they're so like meaningless. I'm not a believer in that. I think it doesn't matter what you call something, like Nielsen Norman Group, they probably didn't begin calling themselves user experience specialists, but well, maybe they did, but a lot of people have been doing user experience for a long time and don't call it that, so maybe they don't think they are, but actually I do know the answer to that. Don Norman just put out a video about how when people ask me what do I tell them. Oh, this kind of goes. This is kind of full circle to the very beginning. I would like to hear this. If it helps said you should watch him because, by the way, he is like a charming man. He's this older, charming guy. Yeah, he's just so great. And he says he's a cognitive designer. That's how he explains it. He said for many years he said one thing, many years he said another. But he just said, you know what? I design like from the cognitive standpoint. So it doesn't matter what the outcome is. He does system design. He does interface design. He designs product design. All kinds of stuff. So I think that's an elegant way to explain it, to just divorce it from the thing, and that's why user experience is kind of nice, because what does user experience mean? I mean, anything. Here's the problem with it though too, is that people throw it around. I know I've talked with some UX professionals at their job where this is not for. I've never had this experience, but their boss will say like, throw some UX on that, or what I mean? They use it like a verb, like UX this please, and then have it on my desk in the morning. Like, what are you talking about? That it doesn't make sense. You should. I can't remember the website, but it's the UX drinking game. Have you seen that website? No, it sounds. It's basically awesome. Like if someone tells you to add more UX, take a drink. Nice. It's just all the typical things people get wrong. Yeah, I actually have a buddy of mine that was forced to give a speech at a conference about human-centered design when he had never done it, and they didn't practice that. It was just a buzzword that his boss wanted to be associated with their group. Therefore, the directive was, learn about this, give a speech, and pretend like we do it. And I mean, it's just absurd to the level of, the level of misunderstanding of it. Yeah, and even, I mean, I've very recently been looking for a job, and
I basically just had to read the job descriptions to figure out if that was actually what I did or not, because it's like user experience,
so true. Yeah.
design, product design, interaction design, visual design. They all seem, they seem like different things, but people just, depending on how much the people who are posting the jobs actually understand it, the titles are not always...
And you can't blame companies. A lot of the time it's like an HR professional who has little to no knowledge of this.
And even when it's not, people use buzzwords, because even if the work they're doing isn't real UX work, they still want somebody that's called a user
and the laundry
designer.
list of required skills is hilarious. It's like you need to know every single prototyping tool. It's like why?
Everybody wants a unicorn.
Yeah, exactly. So all right, so speed round. So the questions are fast. These are just kind of conversation starter type questions. But your answers don't need to be fast. They can be whatever. So what book, movie, album, or other media has had the biggest impact on you?
Well, I think books in general are huge for me. I'm a big reader. Like I remember in middle school, we had a club period for a while, and like everybody else was in like chat club and sports, doing things in the gym, and I was in the bookworm club reading Lord of the Rings.
Nice.
So books are big for me. One of my favorite authors is Elizabeth Kostova. She wrote the Historian. If you haven't read that,
I have not.
You should read that.
Is that on the list?
Yeah. What? That's
on the list of must-reads?
Yep. It's one of my favorites. I'm reading her most recent novel right now, which is called The Shadowland, something like that. I guess I don't look at the cover very often.
I'm bad with that stuff.
But
too.
Also, aside from genre or anything, I'm gotten extremely into audiobooks in the last
me
few
too.
years.
Audible's the greatest service on earth.
I'm completely addicted. I cannot drive my car without listening to an audiobook. It's gotten to the point where my son is 2, and it's to the point now where I feel like I can't just listen to audiobooks when he's in the car, because he's probably like, come on, Mom. So I listen to the radio until I drop him off at daycare, and then I'm like, audiobook.
Nice. I do the same thing with podcasts. I like to listen to podcasts as well.
Yeah. So I love the added, you have the story, but then you have also the added part of the performance of the person who's reading it, which I love.
Yeah, that's cool. So what's the most recent audiobook what are you listening to right now?
I'm listening to American Gods right now, which I forgot the guy's name who wrote it. I haven't read anything of his
What's the
before.
gist?
It's really kind of interesting. So the gist is that the Norse and Greek gods of, the olden days came to America with immigrants. And so now they're all old and irrelevant, and the new gods of like television and money, American gods, basically, they're all like, they're gonna have this big war.
Oh, so they've like physically manifested as humans, as like real?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I'm only about halfway through it, or no, maybe even a third of the way through it, but it's interesting. I go through about 1 or 2 a month, so.
Cool. Wow, that seems like a lot.
Yeah, my commute isn't that long, but if you listen to it when you're driving all the time, then it goes fast.
I used to have office mates, and now I don't. I have an office by myself at work. Mm-hmm. So when I don't have meetings, I just put on podcasts or audiobooks, and Audible's been like a godsend. I'm like, oh, this is great. I tend to listen to nonfiction stuff.
Yeah, I cannot do nonfiction.
Yeah, you just do fiction?
Pretty much, yeah. I'm a very experiential learner.
Yeah, I'm the exact opposite. I'm like, one of my favorite books is like, so dry. People make fun of me.
Really?
Yeah, it's called The Closing of the American Mind, which is like... Anyway.
Yeah, I wish I could read books like that. I think I probably could with audiobooks, because it tends to be less boring when you're listening to somebody read it to you.
Yeah.
But anyway, so music, I have pretty eclectic taste. I grew up listening to classic rock. My stepdad was a big classic rock person. My favorite band is Need to Breathe. Have you heard of them?
No.
You should check them out. They're
Need to Breathe?
Yeah. They've been around for a while, but they're getting bigger now. They're from South Carolina. And as far as movies, I used to be a pretty big movie buff, but I've gotten really into TV lately, which sounds terrible.
No,
but
TV's
I think,
like the new movies.
Yeah, TV is just so much more interesting to me, because it's, you get to know the characters so much better. There's more character development, and you can just watch it for so much longer, basically. My husband and I are watching Baskets right now.
Yeah. Oh
that?
my gosh.
It's so good.
Oh, I love Zach Galifianakis. He's so funny in that.
That show is so unique. It's like
I totally agree.
completely hilarious and also like poignantly beautiful.
Yeah.
It's really strange.
It's pretty dark.
I love it.
But I think it's funny. It makes me laugh out
Yeah,
loud.
Louis Anderson is amazing.
Oh my gosh,
as his
he's
mom.
so good. Yeah. He like won awards for that.
Yeah, he did.
He's got this reputation for being like the most generous of stand-up comedians. He was a famous stand-up in the era of really kind of jerks.
Yeah.
And he's just it comes across. I think I've just always been a fan of Louis Anderson.
Yeah.
He's just lovable. Dude.
I said to my husband, I think it was last night, that I wish I knew her as his mom in real life because she's just so nice.
I love that guy. And I'm a big fan of Zach Galifianakis. He's just ridiculous.
For some reason, he was like off my radar for a very long time, and then I've just more recently watched.
If you're into that like dry, he's so dry. I mean, it's he's absurd and dry at the same time.
I love his southern accent.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Like the Dale character.
Yeah, he's done that character forever. His stand-up is like that. Like he'll occasionally go into that character and stuff. It's really he's great. Was there anything else you want to tell? I don't get enough chance to. I do. I have like, I moonlight outside of work to do the other creative ventures, and like, it's being a new dad. I mean, not new. That's true, but it's just so busy. We don't really watch too much. I get like maybe an hour a night to watch something.
I probably just watch too much TV, but yeah, like I said, even when I'm painting, I got materials that I can use while I'm sitting on my couch.
Nice.
So I can watch TV.
Oh, that reminds me. I was at Adobe held a not a conference, like just like an event at Penn State. It was like, I forget what it's called. They have them all over the place though, but crap, I forget. See, I can't remember stuff. But anyway, it was a bunch of designers got together and like students. There were 3 presenters and they kind of gave speeches, and while that happened, students were doing work, and then they came in and we all used our cell phones to vote, and then whoever won, those students, then the different categories, they won like free Creative Cloud for a year or something. And the one speaker, he's a photography professor at some college in Philly, and they have this new app. Adobe has this app for the iPad where you can kind of draw on iPad.
Yeah, I was just going to say something about that. Yeah.
Oh, what is it called?
It's called Adobe Draw.
Oh, that's what it's called?
Yeah.
You use that?
I do. I was just going to say, I also, when I got laid off, I bought myself an iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil.
Nice.
And so that was another, you can sit on the couch and do it. Yeah.
Well, this might be kind of inspiring for you. I'll put this guy's portfolio in the show notes. So he's the guy, he's just he does photography, but he loves sketching. He's a lot like most creative professionals. In his spare time, he likes to sketch. So iPad Pro, this app from Adobe, and using the pen, and he would sketch portraits of like celebrities and stuff. I mean, other stuff too, but he did a couple like sports figures. He's a big sports buff, and he just posts them on the internet, and he got internet like famous, and now that's what he does for a living.
That's amazing.
He like the 76ers and a bunch of other sports teams, but I think the 76ers were the first. He's like a Philly native. They were the first ones to adopt. I'm probably getting the details wrong, but maybe it's the Celtics for all I know. But one of these basketball teams hired him full time to do sketches for each one of the players. So when they come out, when they come out of the whatever to start the game, that's the picture they show on the big screen.
Wow,
and
that's cool.
And so it's a constant gig because they're always trading players and updating and the starting lineup and blah blah blah. And that's what he does for a living now.
Yeah.
He just sits on it, and he says flat out, sits on his couch with a pen and sketches.
That's pretty amazing.
Sports stars for fun.
Adobe Draw is awesome because you can just click a button and it's on Illustrator on your desktop.
Oh, really?
Just like
awesome.
Send it, and then you can. I mean, Adobe Draw doesn't do as much, obviously, because it's on your iPad. But but then you can get the vectors in Illustrator and mess with them. So
awesome. He did a live demo and it was pretty slick.
Yeah.
I thought it was
impressive. There are a ton of different apps. Adobe Draw is my favorite. I tried out a bunch of them, but
nice. Yeah, I have a Surface. I'm one of those people. I've always been in corporate America as opposed to like a design. I did design firm for a little bit, and they were a Mac shop, but you're on a Dell in corporate America. So my whole career, and I've adopted I just prefer the OS. Actually, when I get on a Mac, so we just started. Not just. I I have trouble with timelines. It was probably like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
We started a Mac product. So as a UX designer, they bought me a Mac that I also have at my station that I use to design on there because they want you to, empathize. And man, I was so lost. I'm like, I couldn't even delete a file. I couldn't even, like, there were minor differences, but they were so different. And that really started getting me thinking about the empathy portion.
Right.
Like, oh man, how on earth am I going to design for this user when, like, I can't even understand the basics of how they think or use this. Like the whole file menu system is like, oh, this is different, Yeah,
I've been on Mac so long now that it's hard to go back
Right.
to PC. But when I did my internship with Schoolwires, they were so small that they didn't have an extra computer for me, but they had a Mac to do testing for tech support.
Gotcha,
so they
yeah.
made me use that, and I just would struggle. I just couldn't figure things out.
I like the Surface. I recommend it. It's a lot less crappy than people think. The new one's nice. I got the newest one. And it's a lot nicer than they're getting better.
Yeah.
I hope they, like the Pixel phone. It's nowhere near. So I'm an iPhone. I can't quit my iPhone.
Yeah.
I just like the Pixel. I think will be good someday.
Yeah.
It's just
I've been considering moving from an iPhone, but I'm not ready yet.
I'm with you. I'm totally with you. I'm like sick of it, but it's so good.
Yeah.
I can't help it. Yeah, it's just too expensive, and it's like it's closed. This is Apple's whole thing, right?
Right.
It's a closed system, and I just like, man, sometimes I want to have two things. I got the big phone, the big Plus.
Did you?
Yeah, because I do a lot more than phone. I rarely use it for phone calls. I do everything else on. And it's just
I know. Whenever I need to make a phone call, I'm like on Instagram, and I'm like, where is my phone?
Yeah, that's funny.
I can't find my phone.
But yeah, I've been the last two times, my last two upgrade periods, I've been heavily researching other phones, and they're not there yet. But someday I think the Pixel has the best shot, but it's not doing. The reviews are not glowing yet. They're good, which is alrighty. So second quick fire question here. What's one thing that you've purchased for under $100 that's made the biggest impact on your life?
That is a tough question. I think in thinking about that, for one thing, it makes me realize how much I spend money on that really doesn't matter. Makes me feel guilty.
While you think, I'll tell you some other common answers or something that for me. So I got the 5-minute journal. Have you heard of this?
I think I probably know kind of what you mean.
Yeah, it's a journal that has, it's for quick journaling. So I was reading about a bunch of, successful people, and they all journal. And I'm like, I don't journal. I should do that. It seems like a good thing, and there's all this data that suggests it's great. And the whole thing we talked about earlier with the mind connecting with drawing, and like I doodle constantly. In fact, I doodle on Post-it notes all the time at work, and I put them on Instagram because someone's like, you should put these. For 8 years, I had a collection on my desk that was like a huge stack. So I've been doing a doodle a day on Instagram
That's cool.
for like almost a year now. They're just like, the little teeny Post-its. So they're like silly little,
Right.
Anyway, but I never did serious journaling, and I tried for a couple of years. I had people for Christmas buy me like really nice leather-bound journals. And it was just this blank page, and I couldn't really I just would brain vomit on it. So what this is cool. It has prompts, and they're just little like fields, like things that are proven to be, good prompts too. Like what are you grateful for today, and different things. So that was a nice small purchase. Or like field notes. Brad Grosnick, I interviewed him, and his answer to that was field notes. He's like, it's this nice little thing I put in my pocket. I whip that thing out whenever I'm talking with people, and it's just the most efficient and best way for me to
Speaking
think.
of field notes, Aaron Draplin is one of my favorite
I love his
designers.
style.
Yeah, I love him. And actually that goes into what I think my answer to this question is my Skillshare membership. Do you know what Skillshare is?
Yeah.
So that I think was $99.
Nice.
So that's $1.
It makes it, but barely.
$1 under $100, but I love it so much, and it has made me learn so much and develop so much as an artist and as a creative. Aaron Draplin has some classes on Skillshare, which is why I said that. But
So what courses have you found most valuable?
So I've done. I think I have like 80 classes saved to do in the future. I'm probably never going to get to them, but they're like, 20 minutes to an hour and a half. They're just
they're great.
so digestible. most recently I've learned how to do pattern design,
Nice.
which is pretty simple, but you know, if you don't know how to do it, you don't know how to do it. So learning how to do that, a lot of graphic design stuff. There's so much. I honestly can't remember all the classes I've taken, but it's just been such a good investment for me personally to be more creative and to kind of follow those goals that I have to branch out more in that area.
Nice.
So,
That's a great answer, and I'll definitely put a link to that.
Yeah,
that
Skillshare is amazing because, you know, if you're not familiar with it, it's not like masters of anything. Anybody can teach a class. I mean, they might have some kind of vetting, but it's just really cool to learn from people who are just like you. So it's less intimidating when you're not learning from somebody who's
right.
some
Like
kind of
lynda.com is really super professional focused,
Right.
and then like eHow, like anyone can post on eHow.
Yeah, and like
Yeah.
Treehouse is more
Yeah.
you know, technically focused, but Skillshare has all of that stuff too. But it's also just, I mean, it's everything. I mean, it's physical arts as well, which is the part I love about it.
So you just figure out how to do anything that you,
Yeah,
because you seem to be a serial. What do you call yourself? A
serial crafter
or something.
Yeah.
So like you can find almost
yeah.
anything.
No
on
matter
there.
what my current obsession is,
Right.
I can find it on
You
Skillshare.
just like, hey, I want to do this today. Boom.
Right. Yep.
Nice.
Yep.
That's awesome. That's a great one. That's a great answer. So, all right, next question. Was there any more you wanted to?
No, that's
Okay.
it.
This is the third one. This is maybe what you were talking about. If you had a time machine and went back 10 years, what would you put? You know, first of all, put us in the place where you were 10 years ago, and what advice would you give your 10-year younger self?
Yeah, well, that's a very appropriate question because I just had my 10-year college reunion
Nice.
2 months ago. Yeah, so 10 years ago I was graduating. Well, I guess I had graduated from college and was in my first job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, before I was married, before I met my husband. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a loaded question for me because I think I am a big believer that things happen for a reason, and like if I actually could go back, I don't know if I would want to do anything differently because you know I have learned so much, and you know you go through. I think the older you get, the more you realize that you go through seasons and like time periods in your life, and they suck sometimes, but they're hugely important when you look back on them. You know, if I could go back in time, I probably wouldn't have quit school hours to work at Chick-fil-A, but I'm so glad that I did.
Right.
For one thing, I met my best friend there, you know, and now,
Nice.
you know, so.
All right, last question, and then we can wrap this thing up. What is one takeaway that you'd like to impart on the listeners, or one last thing that you wanted to say before we get out of here?
Sure. So kind of going back to, I guess I didn't really talk about this that much tonight, but going back to getting laid off, and I feel like I kind of went on this like journey, and I think probably most people who get laid off and don't get a job right away kind of go through this where you're unsure of yourself, and then like I said, I did my website and I learned a lot and felt better, but then you still haven't found a job, so then you feel bad again and you feel better. And one thing that I started doing was more networking, and kind of the same thing you're doing with these podcasts, where I kind of just randomly emailed people who had creative businesses in the area and asked them if I could talk to them. You know, I just said I wasn't asking them for a job, I was just asking if we could chat and I could learn more about what they did. So I think kind of on that same... Sorry.
That's literally what this is. Is what you're. It says it's just on record.
Yeah. So kind of on that same wavelength is, I feel like I said in the last question, you know, if I could go back in time, I probably wouldn't change anything, but I can recognize patterns and seasons in my life, and I think a big thing that I've seen is like my fulfillment and happiness in relation to like my sense of community and like meeting people and having close friends. I'm from this area, and so I went away to school, and then I came back, and then I married somebody who I went to high school with. I didn't actually know him in high school, but we kind of met then after high school or after college and got together. And so it's like coming back to your hometown, you're kind of like redefining your community, which is a really weird thing. And I'm a total introvert and kind of a homebody, and my husband isn't as much of an introvert, but he's a homebody too. So you kind of get in these phases where you're not really making friends, and it's harder when you're an adult. And so I think all of this is to say that developing community sounds kind of silly, but I think it's just so important, and it's one thing that I'm really learning lately. Networking for professional reasons, but also just, as a human being, we are talking about creative pursuits in your free time making you better at your job or feeling more fulfilled in your job. And I think community is the same kind of thing. Like, it just makes you, I don't know, feel more connected to everything. I think that's just like a big takeaway that I've learned throughout my career, and also, losing a job and changing jobs. And I don't know, I think it's just really important.
So that's been kind of a common theme. So, Bien, when I interviewed Bien, he said what he would tell his 10-year younger self is meet more people. Mm-hmm. Brad Grosnick said his main drive, what he learned after he worked in the rat race in New York City, mm-hmm. he learned what he really enjoyed was community.
Yeah.
Him and his wife put on his wife is the primary, but they put on the flea market. I forget the name of it. I'll put
the one by the drive-in, the old drive-in.
No, it's called the son of a bitch. I have to edit
flea
this
markets,
out.
So
yeah, it's this pop-up avenue. They
Where
run
is
the
this?
pop-up avenue. It
Locally?
just pops up locally in State College. Yeah, it's a pop-up
flea
flea
more
market.
Information about that.
Yeah, there's one coming up. So
awesome.
yeah, it's and he does they did that thing where State College set a Guinness Book World Record for ice lanterns. Did you hear about this?
No.
Yeah, he just sets up these crazy things.
Oh,
and cool. It's all about that. It's all about
I think it's just really easy to get comfortable, and I've said several times that I'm a TV addict, and mm-hmm. that's a lot easier than going out and making friends sometimes. And I have a 2-year-old, so being a new parent is alienating sometimes, especially because a lot of my friends in this area don't have kids. So you kind of, we had a baby, and all of a sudden people just look at you like you're an alien, like they can't relate to your life at all. So I just think there are, you go through these life changes, and it's easy to just kind of shrink back a little bit, but I think it's important to be mindful about creating those opportunities for yourself.
Yeah, and here's the third connection. I forgot this one too. Is I just interviewed Sutom Magruder, and he said the number one thing that psychologists do to stay there's a high turnover rate because mm-hmm. they're bearing the burden of all their clients.
I can understand
so a lot of the times their clients are in very critical crisis situations, mm-hmm. and one of the ways they mitigate that is they learn about their coworkers they counsel one another, mm-hmm. and they learn about them not just professionally but personally. So his piece of advice I thought was brilliant was part of what I'm doing with the podcast is I try to take advice from people and make it kind of actionable for someone in the creative field. Mm-hmm. And I thought it'd be really hard from a psychologist's point of view, how does that map mm-hmm. at all? And I found there was a lot of mapping. And one thing that I think, and I'm going to start doing this too, is it's taboo in the corporate world, probably less in academia, but probably just, but maybe a little bit, but still, actually it's probably, I don't know, you can answer that question. I'll ask you because I don't work in academia. But in the corporate world, it's taboo to talk about someone's personal life. Right? That's what people say. Keep it professional. You don't, But in fact, his advice was get personal.
Yeah,
get personal with those people.
It's funny you say that because my team at Blackboard, they were some of my best friends. We still have a Slack channel and we talk on a weekly basis. And they knew more about me than my close friends and family sometimes because we were, I don't know why. I think
you spent so much time with your coworkers. Yeah, we spent
so much time together, and we were all in one room. We weren't separated, and we were all in very different areas in our life, but it was just such a good environment, and I think it was because we were friends. We would go out to lunch all the time, and we actually knew each other and supported each other, and I just think that's really important.
Yeah, I think another word for networking is friends,
Yeah.
right? It's like we call it networking to seem professional. And in fact, there's like, in Silicon Valley, there's a whole backlash on networking. Networking is now like kind of a douchebaggy kind of thing to do. Like, oh, networking? What are you trying to do? Advance your career?
Yeah.
It's like, well, yes and no. Everything advances your career.
Yeah, the funny thing I realized is, like I said, I'm an introvert. It's very unnatural for me to network from what I understood about it.
Right.
But I was working with like a career coach who kind of gave me some tips, and he said, just ask them if they know of anybody else you should talk to, or if you can talk to them about what they do. And people were so incredibly helpful. Like, I didn't ask anybody for a job.
That's awesome.
I didn't ask anybody for anything specific, but they all gave me more people to talk to, and they all were really willing to sit down with me. I was kind of floored by that. I thought that they would just brush me off and think I was, not worth their time, but nobody did that. Everybody was extremely helpful. And
that's such a great takeaway.
Yeah.
I've had the exact same experience. So what's going to happen after I turn off the recording is I'm going to do the same thing I do with all my guests. I'm going to ask you, can you recommend anyone else?
Yeah.
And people have been so gracious and helpful, and I've met so many new people just in that way.
Yeah.
And it's essentially the same thing you're talking about.
Yeah.
I joined this podcast is starting to sound like a plug for CP Squared. It has no affiliation. It just happens to be something I'm really into, and it's a great organization. And same thing there. I go to a CP Squared event. First of all, at the time, I was like one of the only new people. There's been a lot of new people since, but I was new in a room full of people that had been around, and they were like, "Oh, new person," and you wouldn't believe how gracious and like welcoming people were.
Yeah.
They were genuinely excited to say, "Hey, you're new. Tell us about yourself," know, and then it was just great.
I actually read one of my favorite tips about networking. I can't remember where I read it, but it's if you're feeling extremely awkward in a networking event, look for the person who looks like they're feeling extremely awkward and go talk to them and just introduce yourself. Make somebody else feel better, and then you'll hit your stride and feel fine too, which I think is just a great.
You got to check out Vanessa Van Edwards.
Okay.
She has she's pivoted all of her stuff. First of all, she does these great. She's younger, so not like our age, and she puts out these like kind of quick tutorial videos, that are nice and internet digestible, as well. But it's all based in hardcore research, which is great. And she also has like 2-hour-long sessions if you want to watch that stuff or pay for her content. But she puts out so much free content, and it's so worth it. And it talks a lot about this stuff. She does a lot of, so she makes her money by doing corporate gigs, and she's taught. So she knows these micro expressions. She's the foremost expert on them now. She's taken over the research from her mentor. And she teaches poker players how to read poker, so that she makes a lot of money that way.
Wow.
She teaches the art of negotiation because it's all about if you can read micro expressions and other kind of body language, then you can be
negotiation is another thing I've been learning about lately.
Yeah, it's you would love this woman's stuff. It's so good. And she does the little digestible clips are great. It's like how to tips to do in networking. I use them every day at work now.
Yeah.
There's like weird stuff about like squaring your shoulders to a person, and they have this tactic called the 3 head nod, which when someone's talking, if you nod 3 times, it's just this weird thing. Yeah, right. I think most people and extroverts do it organically, but for someone, her whole shtick is she's a recovering awkward person. So none of this stuff came natural to her.
Yeah.
So she had to become an expert and practitioner.
Yeah.
So this has made her uniquely qualified to teach it. And not to mention she's like a hardcore scientist. So she started, so she does all the corporate gigs and the poker stuff to make money to then fund the research. And it's just a self-fulfilling thing. And in the meantime, she puts out all these really fun and cool, super informative videos.
Yeah.
You should definitely check her out. It's really great stuff. She gives tips about that too, like when you're networking and these proven things. One thing she did, I didn't do it for you, I should have, was I did it with the last podcast, was the first question you ask somebody, this is a great piece of advice, is like what's going well in your life or something like that, or what project you're working on that's good.
Yeah.
And it does all kinds of things. It's like it puts them in a good mind frame. Everyone tends to just jump to the thing that's going well. or bad, depending. Or actually, I think you're predisposed to say the bad things, but by putting them in a nice mind frame, the conversation is just proven over time statistically to do better if it starts positively. So just little things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds similar to when I do facilitated usability testing, which is one of my favorite things to do. Yeah. I always just chat with them a little bit first to get them, kind of comfortable and stuff before we start the thing that makes them nervous, which is the test.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a good tip. I might trying to, not that I'm trying to sway them to feel positive.
No,
but...
and that's the thing too, is like everyone I've talked to, it's just like feeling like an imposter. It's like, oh no, if I learn these tips, I'm hacking the human psyche, and now I'm like, and Sutan talked about this a lot. Dr. Sukan Magruder, as a therapist, said like we have the power to manipulate people, but we that's unethical, and this is what gives our profession a bad rap. Like you're not. Everything's manipulating, just I don't know, whatever. But in the true sense, in the like true definition, but in the malice definition of manipulating, it's not. You're just doing things to make people happy. Like, right. What's wrong with that? Like, if I can do something that can ensure a better interaction, why would I not do that? Yeah. I do it like at home now with me and my wife.
Right.
And it's actually like improved our lives. Yeah. Instead of walking in the door and saying, "Oh, let me tell you about my day," walk in the door and say, "Hey, how was your day? Tell me something, or what happened good in your day today?" And all of a sudden, it just like snowballed.
Yeah. Well, I think your attitude, makes such a big difference.
Yeah, it really does.
And everything. So.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good place to stop. Did you have anything else?
I don't think so. I think that was a pretty good overview of my career and kind of the twists and turns.
Well, I'm excited about it. Also, I'm excited about all this stuff we didn't talk about. So maybe down the line, maybe we can do a round 2, because I found so many parallels between our story. It's ridiculous. We didn't even get into it.
Yeah.
We didn't get into the music thing. Right. We didn't get into all the craft stuff on the side. I think that's like a hugely valuable piece of advice. And everyone I've talked to, I'm starting to see these patterns now that I'm around, a handful of interviews, and that's one thing that everyone pervasive across the board. In fact, 100% of the people are into music. Either they're like music dorks that just love, like have an extreme catalog, or they actually play. Most of them play an instrument.
Right. Yeah, actually, that's another part of my story that I didn't talk about. Going through those seasons in your life where things are not going great. I was going through one of those maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I suddenly realized I am focusing way too much on this crappy stuff, and I need to just do something for myself. So I started taking piano lessons.
Nice.
Which made me feel ridiculous because I was in my mid-20s taking beginner piano lessons. But I'm so incredibly grateful that I did that because, I didn't take them for that long, maybe 2 years. And I'm still not great, but I can play the piano for myself when I sing, and that's just was my goal, And
that's a valuable skill too, to like be thrown into a very uncomfortable environment and then like learn from. It's these things are. I think all of them. I can see how all these experiences that you piece. I can see why your answer to the question, "What would you say to yourself?" You're like nothing. Why would I say anything? Because all these experiences build on to make the cumulative. And where you're at now seems like a good place. So.
My dad's classic quote is, "It builds character."
Yeah. Like the whole grit thing. My son's preschool, or not, at kindergarten, they're like about grit. In the elementary school, like, we're going to build grit into your kids. I'm like, that sounds scary.
I've never heard that in that
age.
It's
a whole, you should check it out. It's the whole elementary school. Huh. But it's essentially
they have like fight clubs going on or something.
No, it's proven that like a lot of successful people had terrible upbringings, and not that you have to have had a terrible upbringing to be successful, but the fact of overcoming, like, just like you said, in times of hardship is when you built. Like your dad says, most character.
My husband always complains about that everybody gets a trophy. He was in Teener League or something, and they gave everybody an MVP trophy, and he threw his away because he was like, not everybody can be the MVP.
Yeah, that's a singular award. Most valuable players, plural. So, anyway, I really appreciate it, and Kelly, it's been an honor and a pleasure to meet you.
My pleasure.
This is great. I guess that's how we end. Thanks. I'll turn this off. Hey, thank you so much. That was awesome.
Yeah, it was fun.
Well, there you have it. That was my interview with Kelly Reese. I told you, we geeked out a little bit there. She was a pleasure to sit down with. Just like everyone I've noticed, everyone's been so willing to sit down and just be candid with me. So I just want to say I appreciate it. The podcast is going better than I could have ever expected, thanks to amazing guests like Kelly Reese. Once again, Legends Bar and Grill, they really hooked us up. So I want to say thanks. So make sure to look at that stuff before you leave. Oh, also check out Kelly's personal websites. We put a link to some of her illustration work, her personal website where you can see how she approaches design. So that's it. Yet another episode of Design Approach.